Just before we start today's video, I would like to let you guys know that only 3% of you guys watching my videos are subscribed. So please be sure to force choke that big red button so you can become a part of our giveaway once I reach 1,000 subscribers. Also remember, you must be a public subscriber to join the giveaway.
Greed can be a powerful ally.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another Master Aiden Kenobi fanfiction video. In today's fanfiction, we will be continuing our What If Anakin Beat Obi-Wan and Yoda Beat Palpatine for Part 2. This video will be the start of me releasing Part 2s for all of my popular fanfictions. So without further ado, sit back and relax as we go through perhaps what would be the greatest lightsaber duel in all of galactic history. Yoda was on the run. He was one of the only Jedi left in the galaxy. Surely Darth Vader would eventually reach him, but perhaps he could hide long enough to gain some energy back in order to give his full effort in another engagement with the Sith Lord. The Grand Master would continue sprinting across the streets of the upper part of Coruscant, until eventually he would reach the entrance to the underworld of the city. Upon entering, Yoda would purchase a concealing cloak as not to attract attention to himself. He would then continue to flee, going deeper and deeper into the depths of the city until he could sneak onto a ship and escape the planet altogether. Once he entered hyperspace, Yoda would plot a course for a rendezvous with Bail Organa, just as he had done in the original timeline. After making sure they weren't tracked, Bail would take Yoda to Dagobah, where he would live in exile until it was time to face Vader once again. Back on Coruscant, Vader would continue his search for Yoda. After several days, he would put a halt to the search and focus his attention on other matters. He knew that he would find Yoda someday, maybe not soon, but with due time the Grand Master would get what was coming for him. After discontinuing his search for Yoda, Vader would travel to the medical center where his wife was giving birth to what Vader thought was just one child. Little did he know that Padme would give birth to twins. Just as in the original timeline, the two children would be named Luke and Leia. Vader became filled with joy, perhaps the most joy he had ever felt in his entire life. Surely these two children would grow up to be two of the most powerful Force users the galaxy had ever known when the time was right. They could take their father's place eventually and rule the Empire together. Luke and Leia would eventually be instrumental in helping their father hunt down Master Yoda. After their children had been born, Padme became extremely worried. Her husband had become different, and she could not believe who he had become. She became continuously anxious that he would make their children be the same way that he was, power-hungry monsters. She didn't want them to turn out this way. She would continue to try to convince him to go away with her and the children, but he wouldn't listen. The Empire and eternal control was his main priority. She thought his only wish was to save her from dying. Unfortunately, that had long passed. All Vader was concerned with was increasing his power until there was no one left in the galaxy who could defeat him. Back on Dagobah, Yoda was continuing his training in the Force. Every once in a while, he would commune with Qui-Gon and enrich himself with knowledge of how to transform himself into the Force after he had left the physical realm. Over this time, Yoda became so powerful that any object on the planet would float when his presence was near. The Grand Master had finally realized what had caused him and the Jedi Order to fail. It was blindness to the dark side and submission to the politics of the Republic. He and the other Jedi had merely just become pawns in the Senate's games. Due to recognizing his error, Yoda now embraced all aspects of the Force and had truly transformed himself into a true Jedi, much like Qui-Gon Jinn. Over the next several years, Vader would train his two children in the ways of the dark side. On numerous occasions, he would take them to Sith temples on ancient Sith worlds such as Malachor and Korriban. The two twins would become extremely powerful in the Force, always completing every task their father could conjure up. One day, in the cold, dimly lit chambers of the Sith temple on Korriban, Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, stood ominously before his two children and apprentices. Before long, he would release two deadly training droids. The twins would immediately ignite their crimson red sabers and start deflecting the blaster bolts that were being shot at them. They would continue to do so with ease until eventually the two training droids were mercilessly sliced in half, each one being destroyed by a different twin. Once their task had been completed, their father would teach them various lessons about the Force and the dark side that could further and deepen their knowledge of the Force within the realm of the dark side. One day, Leia became so angry and filled with rage, she let out an extraordinary scream that was to Luke's and their father's surprise, followed by a burst of Force lightning. The blast hit Luke within seconds and rendered him defenseless on the floor on their father's castle on Mustafar. Good, my daughter. Use your aggressive feelings and let the hate flow through you. Over the next few seconds, Leia would continue shooting Force lightning at her brother until she had calmed down and halted. Luke was in pain and internally questioned what had caused his sister's sudden outburst of rage. In addition to this, he wondered why his father had encouraged her behavior. Perhaps this was his father's way of showing him that the Sith do not tolerate weakness, even within their own ranks. After contemplating what had just happened, Luke would venture to his chambers where he would pour all of his emotions into training on his own. This was exactly what Vader had planned, for one of his children to become motivated, and so much so that they would endlessly train and perfect their abilities within the dark side, which was exactly what Luke was doing. Back on Dagobah, Yoda was meditating deep within the Force, until suddenly he heard a voice. The old Jedi Master would soon figure out that the voice was not one, but two.
Who's there? Show yourself.
Yoda. Yoda. Yoda, it is I, your old friend, Obi-Wan Kenobi. And it is I, Qui-Gon Jinn. Both Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon had transformed themselves into the Force after death. Qui-Gon had done so after being killed by Darth Maul, and Obi-Wan had done so after Qui-Gon had communicated with him immediately after he was slain by Anakin on Mustafar, with Qui-Gon being trained by the Wills, also known as the Force Priestesses. Yoda, there is something you must know. Anakin and Padme had 2 children, and they are currently being instructed in the ways of the dark side. Their mother has become distressed and worried about her children, but is fearful of what her husband would do if he found out that she had feelings of disloyalty to the most powerful man in the galaxy. The twins have become both extremely powerful. Surely Vader will use them in his hunt for you.
His presence I can feel. Swelling within him anger is. His attacks, reckless they will be.
He will bring his children. Use them to your advantage by communicating with Padme. Yoda had different ideas. He could sway the twins easier. Yes, draw upon their emotions. They have a close connection with their mother, and their father refuses to see it.
My friends, in order a thank you is...
May the Force be with you, old friend. As his friends disappeared back into the cosmic realm of the Force, Yoda contemplated the eventual battle that would occur between him, Vader, and the twins. Over the next several weeks, he would continuously meditate and foresee upcoming battle, trying to decipher what moves he would take in order to leave the battle unscathed and victorious. This upcoming battle would be one of his most difficult battles yet, but this time he would not be blinded by his previous dogmatic ways. This time he would give himself over to the Force fully and use all of its aspects in aspiring to defeat the Sith. Back on Coruscant, Lord Vader could sense a shift within the Force. Something was coming. He knew it was Yoda, but there was something else, something unforeseen within the future. He tried to reach deeper into the Force and into the future, but all of his efforts were unsuccessful. This made him extremely angry. It was time to make the Jedi pay even more for what they had done to him. Vader and his merciless Imperial army had made sure that almost all of the Jedi were eradicated from the galaxy, but now he had to be sure. It was time to send his 2 apprentices on their first mission alone, without their father. Across the city on Coruscant, Padme and her 2 children were discussing what accomplishments they had achieved throughout their last several months away from home. Even though their actions echoed those of her husband, she pretended that she was extremely proud of them. She was constantly in fear of what would be done to her if he found out that she was disloyal in any way. The twins were also extremely loyal to their father, but Luke not as much, but her father nor mother didn't know this. The 2 would surely relay any disloyal information to their father, regardless of who it came from, even if it was the very being that had brought them into existence. Suddenly, both Luke and Leia would receive alerts on their communication devices. It was the Admiral. Lord Vader, their father, required their presence immediately. Upon leaving their mother's apartment and using their ships to travel across the planet, Luke and Leia would move swiftly across the industrial sky of their father's city until they reached what was formerly known as the Jedi Temple, but was now known as the Imperial Palace, which housed their father's office, the Emperor's Chambers. These chambers were specifically placed in what used to be the Jedi Council chambers. Vader had done this in spite of the fact that the Jedi Council, and in specifically Mace Windu, had not granted him the rank of Master. "My children, please take a seat. I have news for you." "What is it, Father?" "One of my oldest enemies is still lurking in our galaxy. He evaded me years ago. I intend for the opposite to occur, with your help." "We are at your disposal, Father. What is this enemy's name?" During the entirety of this meeting and conversation, Luke had become disillusioned. His focus was on his mother and the distress he could sense within her. He had become disgusted with the way his mother had been treated, but couldn't express his feelings due to the fact that his father would greatly disapprove and surely send him into exile. "Yoda. He was the leader of the Jedi and one of the most powerful members, of which wouldn't compare to your power, my son." "Yoda. He was the leader of the Jedi and one of its most powerful members. My son, are you ready to take on this extraordinary task?" Yes, my master." "Good. You will depart in the morning." "Understood, Father. We will not disappoint you." And with that, the twins would take off on their first mission alone. Their objective: hunt down and kill Jedi Master Yoda, a traitor and enemy of the Galactic Empire. Leia fully bought into this objective. She was simply disgusted by the fact that any Jedi were still alive and wanted justice immediately. The two would depart from the Imperial capital on a newly designed Star Destroyer that had been commissioned by Vader just for his two children. It was massive in comparison to a normal Star Destroyer, and was second to none in combat, itinerary, troops, fighters, and commanders. The only ship that exceeded theirs was of course the Emperor's ship, their father's ship. As they were traveling across the galaxy to certain points of interest where Jedi may have been at one point or another, Luke started to become extremely hesitant, and his sister took note of this. She sneered at any thought of disloyalty to their father and the Empire. In the next several moments, Leia would question her brother and his true intentions. At last, after being berated, Luke had had enough. He burst out in anger, telling her of the distress their mother was in and how horribly she was being treated by their father. Immediately after their argument, Luke would go to his private quarters on the ship to meditate. Maybe he could clear his mind and make sense of what was happening within his very confused life. While he was meditating, Luke would contemplate all of the major events that had transpired within his relatively short life. He wondered what had gone wrong. He tried to convince himself that what their father was doing was for the betterment of the galaxy. Darth Vader had brought peace, freedom, justice, and security to the Empire. But it didn't work. What his father had truly done was bring terror, death, and destruction into the lives of trillions of people. But worst of all, he had broken his wife's heart and destroyed her life. Vader had also indoctrinated both he and his sister into blindly following the ways of both the dark side and the Sith. Their father had never even given them a chance to decide what their own path would look like. They were both dogs, just taking orders and executing them without question and with perfection. Luke was sick of this. He knew his powers could be put to better use, but for now, he would have to go along with what his sister's and father's orders were, so as not to anger him and turn her against him. He would have to choose the exact perfect time and place to turn on the dark side, the Sith, and his father, of course his sister as well. Back on Coruscant, Vader was contemplating his decision to send the twins on a mission by themselves. He could sense the conflict within his son, but has the utmost faith in his daughter's course correction of her brother. Surely his children would eventually find Yoda, but were they powerful enough to capture him and bring him to the Imperial City? Unfortunately for Vader, Yoda knew this search was coming. He wanted the twins and Vader to find him so he could sway one of them with the use of their mother's name. Using Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's advice, Yoda would prepare himself physically and mentally to face what may yet be his most difficult task. This task wasn't to defeat the twins. It was to convince them that the dark side was the wrong path and that their father was ripping apart the very being of their mother's and the galaxy's existence. Yoda knew what he would need to do. The Jedi Master's plan was to let the twins find him and then let his ID follow suit. Back on their Star Destroyer, Luke and Leia were approaching their first destination, a long-abandoned Jedi temple in the Outer Rim. This place would give them their first clues they would need to find this Jedi Master that their father had ordered them to find. What Leia and their father didn't know was that Luke would find harmony within this place. Past relics and memories from this grand Jedi temple would teach him that his powers could be used for good, not evil, and certainly not for his father to do with as he wished, whenever he wished. The Jedi temple was dimly lit, with ancient statues of Jedi Masters lining the hallway. A brooding and conflicted version of Luke Skywalker, dressed in dark robes, paced back and forth in a small meditation chamber. Suddenly, a translucent figure of a Jedi Force ghost materialized before him. "Luke, my young apprentice, why do you persist in this path of darkness?" "Master, my father has deceived my sister and I into believing the ways of the dark side and the Sith. Their ideals have failed me, just as they have failed my father. He is just too blind to see it." "Luke, you must understand that the Sith indoctrinate themselves. They become engulfed with their own power and strength. They push this on to others around them as well. But it is through using all aspects of the Force for good that balance can be achieved." Luke stops pacing and glares at the Force ghost. "Balance? Is that what you call it? The Jedi preach balance, yet they suppress their emotions and deny the power of the dark side. How is that balance?" "Luke, the dark side is seductive. It promises power and control, but it corrupts the very essence of who you are. Embracing it will lead to nothing but pain and suffering. I was not a traditional Jedi. I too embraced the dark side at one point, but eventually I came to realize that it was not worth it. The Jedi Order your father wiped out was disillusioned and controlled by politics. They were blinded, just as the Sith are. One being survived your father's destruction and began to change his ways. He started to embrace all aspects of the Force. His name was Yoda. Short in stature, but wise in mind and very powerful." Luke started to clench his fists, his eyes filled with conflict. "And what about my family, Master? My father, Vader? Surely he and my sister will cast me aside, if not kill me, if they find out I'm contemplating disloyalty to the dark side. Indeed, if you can convince Yoda that you are worthy, he may take you in. You have the potential within you, Luke. Choose good, and you can redeem not only yourself, but also those who came before you." Luke took a deep breath, his conflicted emotions visibly battling within him. I don't know if I can let go of my anger, my desire for revenge." "Luke, anger and revenge will only consume you. True power lies in forgiveness and compassion. It is never too late to change, to choose a different path." Luke would slowly nod, his face a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "I will try, Master, for myself, for my family, and for the galaxy." The Force Ghost would smile, slowly fading away as if carried by the wind. "May the Force be with you, Luke Skywalker, always." Suddenly, the ghost would disappear into nothingness. Luke was left alone in the chamber, contemplating the words of the Force Ghost. A flicker of hope had sparked within him, as he began to question his allegiance to the dark side even further, while also considering the possibility of redemption. After coming to fruition with what had just occurred, Luke would travel back through the temple until he came across his sister, who was wondering where and why he had left her to be alone. He could sense the anger boiling within her. "Where were you? We should be searching for clues together. We are stronger with the dark side together. Surely you alone couldn't find anything about the Jedi." After hearing his sister bash him with words of hate and discouragement, he started to become furious inside. He wanted to lash out and destroy her, but then he remembered what the wise Jedi Master had told him. He began to settle. He needed to become a fraud in order to convince Leia and their father of his unquestioning loyalty, and then suddenly betray them. "Of course, sister, we must bring our powers together, for they will be ultimately strong." The two twins would fuse their dark side powers together. After doing so, Yoda would sense a tremor within the Force. This was his signal, his chance to unleash the plan. Yoda immediately took off for his old Jedi fighter. As he exited the Dagobah atmosphere, he would look deep into the Force in order to sense where the tremor was. Once the Force was done guiding him, his ship's hyperspace engines would roar to life and Yoda would depart from the system for the first time since after arriving due to his defeat. Back on Coruscant, Padme was in distress. He had taken her children from her, indoctrinated them, and shut her out of their lives. She didn't even know this man anymore. In her eyes, Anakin Skywalker was dead. Originally, she had thought there was still some good left in him, but after seeing what he had encouraged, she refused to believe it anymore. She had had enough of this. She was going to confront him once and for all. Little did she know that he truly did not care for her anymore. She would surely regret ever meeting that innocent little 9-year-old boy back on Tatooine all those years ago. After using a chauffeur to transport herself to the headquarters, she would depart from the vehicle and make her way through until she reached the Emperor's chambers. "What are you doing here?" Padme would go on to berate him with arguments, getting more angry as each second passed by. She debated him on what he had done to her children and where they were right now as they were speaking. "You would be nothing without me, and your children. My apprentices are out there, hunting the rest of the putrid Jedi, the same Jedi who betrayed me, cast me aside and didn't think anything would happen. Look at where they are now. They are nothing. Worthless hermits barely strung and alive throughout the galaxy. My children will become more powerful than me, and when they do, my place will be taken and my destiny will be fulfilled." Padme couldn't believe what she was hearing. Without her, he would have no children, no dogs to command, and a master and no reason to become more powerful. He would have stayed a worthless, dogmatic Jedi Knight whose own friends, masters, and comrades didn't truly believe in him. She would start yelling at him, screaming to get her point across to him. She knew the effort was worthless, but she had to release all of her built-up anger and hate in order to stay somewhat sane. Even before she had started yelling, Vader had ceased to even listen or acknowledge her. This was the case until one single word, one single being's name broke through to him. Yoda. Padme had been contacted by Yoda just hours before. He told her of their children and what Vader had planned for them. He also spoke of his plan to turn one of them to the good side, but most importantly, back to her side, their mother's side. When one is a Sith Lord, they become so cynical, so wrapped up within oneself. In fact, they even become narcissistic. After hearing the name, Vader started to blame his old master for everything. Letting young Anakin into the Jedi Order, holding him back, not granting him the rank of master, and finally not caring whatsoever about what he thought was Anakin's sudden turn to the dark side. At least Obi-Wan had felt some sorrow when he had learned. Vader continued on within his mind, convincing himself that everything that had gone up until this very moment was Yoda's fault. These thoughts only took several seconds in real time. Suddenly, Vader would stop thinking, reach out his arm towards his wife, and make a gesture with his fingers. Padme would immediately take both of her hands and grasp her throat as she started to rise up into the air. Vader's eyes started to turn an evil Sith red. It was as if he had never known this woman. He continued on until his message had finally been heard. After releasing her from his grip, she would fall to the floor and start crying until one of his officers removed her from the chambers to take her back to the ship she had arrived in. As she was leaving and flying within the city sky, she thought to herself what she would do to get revenge against him, the man who had stolen her children from her and made them puppets. Once she arrived back at her apartment, she would start to hatch an ultimate plan to get revenge against the Sith Emperor, Darth Vader. Back at the desolate Jedi Temple, Luke and Leia were beginning to exit. Leia believed that they had found nothing and should move on to the next location. What she didn't know was that Luke was hiding something from her. After communing with the Force Ghost, Luke could feel new connections being made between his material being and the Force itself. Eventually, he became in tune with these connections, and he could feel something moving closer and closer to him. At first, Luke didn't know that what he was sensing was Yoda's presence. The old Jedi Master had almost reached them, his plan just starting to take shape. Leia could not sense the presence of Yoda. She was blind to the same connections that Luke had generated within himself. This factor would play greatly to Yoda's advantage when he did indeed arrive. But as the twins came closer and closer to exiting the temple, she could sense something was off with her brother. Luke grew unusually quiet, with his black cloak concealing his face. "Brother, what is wrong with you? I sense something is off. Reveal what you are hiding." "It is nothing. I just simply want to keep the darkness within myself without becoming exposed to the light within the temple." What Luke had said made sense. Leia would go along with it, but she still felt something was slightly off. Unfortunately for her, what she now sensed was the presence of another being. As Yoda entered the atmosphere of the mysterious planet, he could sense the twins and where their precise location was. This was it, his last chance to give life back to the Jedi Order. His last chance to change and make things right after decades of failing to see his mistakes. He could also feel the essence of the temple and how soaked it was within the light side of the Force. This connection Yoda had made with the temple showed him what true balance was like. He would need to tighten the connection even further if he was going to convince one of the twins to create balance within themselves as well. There were still two major factors that the Jedi Master didn't know. One greatly increased his advantage, and the other evened the playing field in favor of the twins, and more precisely their father, Vader. Luke was already starting to find balance within himself, while Leia, on the other hand, had become increasingly unbalanced as each second passed by. The balance in the light within the temple tried to reach her, but each and every attempt was denied by her material being. Darth Vader had truly formed the most perfect being within the dark side. As he was approaching the temple, Yoda could see two figures exiting the entrance. His Jedi starfighter roared through the air as it came to a halt and approached the ground until its engine ceased and the door cracked open as the exiled Jedi Grand Master exited the ship onto the ground. Luke and Leia looked into the sky and then out in the distance as they saw a small green figure emerge from the ship that had just landed. Leia immediately became furious, uncloaking herself and preparing for an encounter with whoever this being was. Luke, on the other hand, knew it was a Jedi. He was still somewhat conflicted. As Yoda drew nearer to the twins, he could sense the anger boiling over within Leia. She had clearly sensed what he was by now. What he sensed within Luke was conflict, but conflict leaning towards the light side. Yoda could tell that the boy's material body wanted so badly to become balanced within the Force, but his conscious mind was what needed convincing. Knowing these factors would allow the Grand Master to alter his plan, which was now to convince only the boy to join him and become balanced within the Force. Somehow he would have to separate the two in order to reach Luke. Leia sensed that the Jedi had centered his focus on Luke. This enraged her. As the clash began, Leia ignited her blood-red lightsaber, its crimson blade casting an eerie glow on her pale, menacing face. The scarlet hue symbolized her allegiance to the dark side. Yoda, wielding his signature green lightsaber, activated it with a brilliant emerald beam, shining with the purity of his unwavering commitment to the light side of the Force and balance. Luke, obviously still conflicted, would not attack yet. This factor somehow increased Leia's fury even more. Yoda would need to move quickly and precisely in order to see his plan come to fruition. With a surge of energy, Leia lunged forward, her aggressive style reflecting her inner turmoil. Her strikes were fierce and relentless, fueled by her deep-seated anger and desire for power. Yoda, despite his diminutive stature, matched her ferocity with an agile grace. He flowed like water, anticipating her movements and countering with precise parries and evasive maneuvers. Her lightsabers clashed, the clash of red and green filling the air with a symphony of crackling energy. Leia's attacks were fueled by her raw power, but Yoda's mastery of Form 4 Ataru allowed him to harness his small size as an advantage. He leaped and spun, using the Force to enhance his acrobatic movements, darting around Leia with astonishing speed. The ongoing battle was both intense and concentrated by its fighters. Every single strike that Leia dealt was blocked with such precision that she had to conjure more advanced attacks each time she attacked again. After being continuously berated by comments and harsh words from his sister, Luke would eventually join her in battling the Grand Master. Of course he was still conflicted, but for now he had sided with darkness. This was due to the fact that he had known his sister and the dark side, for that matter, much longer than he had ever known Yoda, this creature, and the concept of balance within the Force. Yoda was losing time. He was very powerful and skilled. but he just couldn't keep up with the sheer power and speed that the twins had brought to the duel. He was also very old and had not dueled or fought anyone in a number of years. Luke and Leia, on the other hand, had trained and fought almost every day of their lives, due to the instant pressure that Vader had put on them. Yoda did have one major advantage though: ultimate experience and intelligence. Undeterred, Leia unleashed a torrent of aggression, her strikes growing wilder and more unpredictable. But Yoda, ever the paragon of serenity, maintained his calm focus. With every strike, he found the precise moment to redirect Leia's energy, using her own momentum against her. His strikes were deliberate and measured, striking at critical weak points in Leia's defense. As the three Force users continued to duel, Luke's attacks would become more and more indecisive. This factor also distracted Leia, because she would always have to be worried about her brother's attacks and defense, instead of being completely focused on her own attacks and maneuvers. Suddenly, Leia would lunge at Yoda, but he would evade it by using the Force to flip over her and then start his own attack from behind. Despite the speed of Yoda's attack, Leia recovered even quicker, turning around to face the Grand Master with her crimson red lightsaber in hand. Up until this moment, Yoda believed that he was superior to the twins in Force abilities. He was wrong. Leia would slowly and menacingly raise her hand and conjure up a deadly blast of Force lightning and aim it at Yoda, just as Palpatine had done against him. Yoda would quickly clip his lightsaber and then raise his hands to block the lightning using Tuta Menace. Unfortunately for the little green Jedi, Leia's blast would be much more powerful than Palpatine's. This would overcome Yoda and force him to become electrocuted while also falling to the ground. After momentarily defeating Yoda, Leia would deactivate her saber and slowly start walking towards the almost defeated Grand Master of the once mighty Jedi Order. This would be perhaps her greatest victory yet. She had conquered planets, mastered populations, and had nearly become more powerful than her father. But this feat would be the final blow that would end the Jedi once and for all, forcing the galaxy into eternal darkness. But this was not set in stone. Leia had become so wrapped up in her own achievements that she didn't notice Yoda speaking to Luke.
My young friend, too late to change it is not. Consuming you, the darkness no longer is.
I want to change, but I can't help but think of my sister and father. I have known them my whole life. Surely I would never see them again.
Understand you must, that your father truly isn't who he once was. Completely changed he has. Power and control are all he cares for now. Care for you he does not. Your sister, the same. Happened to her it has.
After hearing Yoda's wise words, he finally understood everything. The dark side consumes, rips apart, and destroys everything. Luke was done with it. He had had enough torture, despair, and suffering. It was time for him to become balanced. As Leia continued shooting Force lightning, Luke would ignite his lightsaber and charge forward towards Leia. Before she could even realize what had happened, she would look down to see that her lightsaber had fallen to the ground, and her hand with it. She turned around in a fit of rage only to be met by her brother's saber, the blade pointed right at her face. Leia, your rage has unbalanced you. It is over. Surrender and I will show you mercy. Leia said nothing back to her brother. She could sense something he could not. He wondered why she had awkwardly grown silent. Normally she spent all of her time boasting about being better than him, about how powerful she was, and how she would one day become Empress when their father died. Clearly something was off. Right when Yoda had landed, Vader had sensed his presence within the Force. This was due to his connection with Leia, who had channeled part of her energy into her father so he could feel her and those around. Immediately after sensing Yoda, he had left Coruscant with his wife, forcing her to come along. Vader had also sensed the conflict within his son and believed that if Luke saw Padme, his mother, he would be convinced to fully embrace the dark side. Vader would be wrong. As they were close to approaching the same desolate world that the other three were on, Luke's presence suddenly went cold to his father. This made Vader mad and enraged him. The reason Vader could no longer sense his son was because he was no longer a Sith. With Yoda's help, Luke had become balanced within the Force, neither fully embracing the dark side or the light side. After momentarily defeating Leia, Luke would go over to Yoda to see if he was okay. Indeed he was, and he immediately stood up. The Grand Master could also sense that something was indeed off within the Force. Together, they both reached out into the Force. It was darkness, the Sith Emperor, Lord Vader. Luke and Leia's father, conqueror of worlds and the entire galaxy. As Vader's ship flew down to the surface, an evil sneer could be seen on Leia's face. She believed that once their father joined her, they would be unstoppable. Neither Luke or Yoda showed any sign of fear. They would work together in order to stop evil from plaguing the galaxy any longer. Once Vader exited his ship with Padme, he would see what had become of both of his children. One had been defeated, and the other had completely betrayed him. His plan would be to fight both his son and Yoda with Leia, kill Yoda, and then convince his son to rejoin him, luring him in with his mother. "Get up, my daughter, and fight." "Yes, father." Both Leia and Vader would stand in front of Luke and Yoda, ready to face off in perhaps what would be the most intense battle in galactic history. Two crimson red lightsabers would ignite. As they did, both Vader and Leia's eyes turned blood Sith red, symbolizing ultimate allegiance to the dark side. Just seconds after this, another red lightsaber would ignite, but also a vibrant green saber. Once the battle started, Vader and Leia would stay close together, due to the fact that she only had one hand to fight with. She was a formidable opponent, but not nearly a match for either Luke or Yoda by herself. Fortunately for her, Vader would make up for this. He was undoubtedly the most powerful out of the four Force users. As the confrontation commenced, Vader lunged forward with an aggressive onslaught, wielding his lightsaber with a brutal and relentless style. His movements were reminiscent of his past as a skilled Jedi Knight, but now tainted by darkness, his strikes dipped with malice. Leia mirrored her father's aggression, her strikes fueled by a mixture of hatred and the desire to prove her worth. In contrast, Luke and Yoda showcased their mastery of the light side and balance. Luke's movements were fluid and controlled, channeling his unwavering belief in the power of redemption. Yoda, despite his diminutive stature, displayed remarkable agility, darting around his adversaries with calculated precision, his strikes carefully timed and aimed to exploit openings in their defense. Emotions rang high on both sides. Vader's face contorted with rage, his intentions extremely dark and gruesome. His main target was Yoda. Despite his anger and hatred for what his son had become, Luke was still his son and could not bring himself to have the intention to kill him. Leia, longing for validation and recognition, fought with a desperate determination to prove herself. Luke, burdened by the weight of his family's dark legacy, fought with a mixture of sorrow and determination, fueled by the hope that he could help bring balance to the Force. And Yoda, a beacon of unwavering resolve, channeled his emotions into focused intent, guided by a profound understanding of the balance between the light and dark. As lightsabers clashed, the battlefield became a maelstrom of kinetic energy. Vader's raw power clashed against Luke's steadfast defense, each striking an echo of their familial connection. Leia and Yoda engaged in a fierce dance, their styles juxtaposed. Leia's aggressive and volatile, Yoda's measured and precise. The young Darksider fought with desperation, seeking to overcome Yoda's calm mastery. Throughout the battle, the environment bore witness to their struggle. The crumbling walls of the stronghold trembled under the weight of their power, debris cascading around them. The air crackled with energy, bolts of force lightning and telekinetic blasts adding to the chaos of the clash. Every moment, every maneuver carried the weight of their conflicting destinies, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. As the battle reached its climax, a critical moment arrived. Leia found herself momentarily vulnerable, a result of her unchecked rage and impulsive actions. Luke, sensing an opportunity for redemption, deftly disarmed her, his gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow. Leia, however, refused to yield, succumbing to her anger and launching a final, desperate attack. Of course, this attack would fail due to her damaged state. Leia would lay on the ground, defeated and broken. Neither Yoda or Luke would give the finishing blow, for it wasn't either of their ways. From now on, Vader would have to position himself in between Luke and Yoda. As Leia fell to the ground once again, her mother would call out in the distance for her husband to stop this madness. She couldn't stand to see her family ripped apart even further than it had been already. This was her final test to see if there was any small piece of Anakin Skywalker left within him. Unfortunately, her heart would be ripped apart one last time. The Sith Emperor, Darth Vader, had had enough of his wife's treachery. It was time to end her pathetic life. He could hear her voice in the distance as he was clashing sabers with Yoda and his son. In a fit of rage, he would conjure up an extraordinarily powerful blast of Force lightning, combined with the Force push to throw both of the Force users to the ground. He would then turn to face his wife, with one hand raised. Vader would clasp his hand together, grabbing hold of Padme's throat with the Force. She would rise into the air and immediately grasp her throat with both hands. As soon as Luke recovered from his father's attack, he would rise to his feet and realize what was happening. He wouldn't let his mother die. She was one of the only people left in the galaxy who truly cared for him. Using a pinpoint attack aimed at his father's wrist, Luke would use a Force rush to reach his father's position within a second. His father would see the attack coming, but when it was too late. Due to his precise powers, abilities, and reactions within the Force, he would be able to twist his body in order to block the oncoming attack with his crimson red saber. In doing so, he would have to release Padme from his grip. After doing so, she would fall to the ground and become unconscious. As Luke and Vader were clashing together, Yoda would recover from the previous attack as well. It had taken him longer due to his old age. Vader would now have his hands full. He would have to put all of his dark energy into his effort. His goal would be to destroy Yoda once and for all. After doing that, he could punish his son for this betrayal and ultimately force him to join the dark side and become loyal once again. As the intense battle raged on, Yoda's great acrobatic skill coupled with Luke's natural talent and immense Force powers held Vader at bay. What kept him in the battle was his sheer ferocity and determination to win. Suddenly, Vader would jump into the air and flip over his son. As soon as he landed, he would outstretch his hand and use his dark power to push Luke into the distance, so that it would be only him and Yoda. Vader would march forward and start berating the Jedi Master with a flurry of aggressive attacks. Each of the Sith Lord's strikes was filled with anger and emotion that had been built up ever since Yoda and the Jedi had betrayed him all those years ago. He wanted to make them pay for what they had done. Ultimately, Yoda was at the helm of every major decision the Jedi had made. This was the reason Vader had truly never been satisfied with any of the Jedi he had killed since Order 66. Why would one be satisfied with merely taking out minions of a greater power? By this point, Luke had rejoined the fight, defending both himself and Yoda with a mix of regained inner strength and agility. Vader's following attacks were immense, his strikes filled with a ruthless precision, aimed at breaking Luke's defenses and shattering his resolve. Sensing a weak point within Vader, Yoda's focus intensified, his movements becoming deliberate, each strike aiming to defeat the ruthless Sith Lord that had caused the galaxy so much pain and suffering. He countered the Sith Lord's attacks with a combination of precise parries and Force-assisted maneuvers. The battle unfolded with a breathtaking intensity. Each swing of a lightsaber, every clash of blades, sent shockwaves through the Force. The dark side fought back with a ferocity matched only by the unwavering determination of Luke. The struggle between light and dark played out in a symphony of power and emotion. Meanwhile, Yoda's defense began to waver, the strain of battling Vader taking its toll. The Sith Lord pressed on, relentless and unyielding. In a moment of clarity, Yoda recognized that his own sacrifice was necessary to give Luke the chance to overcome the darkness. With the final surge of energy, Yoda redirected Vader's attacks, channeling his power away from his comrades and into himself. The Force roared, a symphony of light and dark entwined. As Yoda unleashed his final gambit, the world quaked, the very fabric of the Force trembling under the weight of his sacrifice. Luke and Vader continued to fight on. Luke was determined to serve justice. He knew that Yoda's sacrifice would not be in vain. With renewed purpose, Luke channeled his grief and resolve, striking blow after blow against Vader. Their lightsabers danced through the air, carving arcs of light that defined the encroaching darkness. Finally, with a blinding burst of energy, Luke would break through his father's defense and deliver a finishing blow. He had not destroyed his father, he had freed the galaxy from the tyrannical reign of the Sith. Unfortunately, the Empire was still strung through the galaxy, half of its forces still made up of clone troopers. Upon finding out that their leader had been destroyed, most of the clones would join Luke and stand for freedom and democracy once again. All of the other Imperials were still power-hungry and wanted the Empire to reign supreme. A power struggle would ensue. Civil war would rage to life throughout the galaxy, with the now balanced and most powerful Force user, Luke Skywalker, at the center of it. And that is the end to part 2 of this very long fan fiction. I hope you guys enjoyed this extremely long video and the story that unfolded within it. Please let me know what you thought of the story I told down below in the comments. Also be sure to like and subscribe because I will be doing multiple giveaways once I reach 1,000 subscribers. And as always,